Greetings, blessings, and shalom. We've spoken about the 3 covenants God made with Israel. It wasn't 2, it wasn't 4. It was 3. And we've looked at how each covenant brings forth another aspect of God's nature in a particular order that He wants us to understand so that we will be able to come into relationship with Him, knowing Him as He is. So, like He made 3 covenants with Israel, there were 3 patriarchs. Not 2, not 4, not 5. And I suggest that there's a significance there. He could have had 4 patriarchs, but He has 3. And then after the 3rd patriarch, after Jacob, who became Israel, comes the 12 tribes. So there's something unique, don't you think? Doesn't it make sense? That if He's chosen the 3 patriarchs and He calls Himself by the name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that you would think that there would be something in the life of each one of those patriarchs that would be a message for us, a life lesson, something that would be helpful for us to know in the development of our coming into intimate relationship with God. Abraham was the first and really the foundation. And we read in Scripture that God's relationship with Israel is founded by, goes back to His relationship with Abraham. And when we think about Abraham, in the first meeting that's recorded in Scripture, so we take it that Abraham didn't have any encounter with God prior to what we read in Genesis chapter 12. He says to him, imagine, leave your land, leave your family and all your relationships, and leave your father's house. He says, leave the source of your provision, the source of your emotional sustenance, and your very identity. Leave that all. Now, I think we may have mentioned this already in a prior speaking, but it bears repeating. How amazing. In the first meeting, God says to Abraham, very specifically, leave everything you know of this world. Perhaps we imagine as we go along in our spiritual development that this kind of separation from temporal things would come later on as we grow. But we see here in the life of Abraham, was the father of our faith. This was step number 1. This was the beginning of God's interaction with Abraham. And you might say, the walk with God only begins as it began with Abraham. He's the father of our faith. He's the picture for us. He's the pattern of how it goes and develops. And in a sense, He's saying to Abraham, if you're going to walk with me, and we talk about walking with God, and surely we talk about walking with God long before perhaps we have come to having let go of all of these worldly things. But in actuality, if we look at what's revealed in Genesis chapter 12, we might say, if we've not let go of all those things, we haven't started to walk yet. And we're just perhaps marking time and place, and not yet gone anywhere. But in speaking about the nature of Abraham, how? It's somewhat unimaginable that he would begin in this first interaction with giving everything up. And we have to say, he knew something. He could see. He had to be able to see the invisible. He had to know something intrinsically within, by the Spirit of the nature of God, that he could so walk away from every level of security and provision and go and follow someone that he had never met before. So I say, Abraham is the picture of the foundation of our life with God. In a way, going back to what we said previously, he got the name El Shaddai. And it wasn't just intellectual, but he had this in his heart. And as we follow along, God says to Abraham, I want you to take your son Isaac and sacrifice him to me. He spoke to Abraham in the night. Abraham was in Beersheba, in the south of the land. And imagine how we would respond to something like that. Having heard something, thought something, felt that God spoke to us, something that unimaginably radical. What would we do? Fast and pray, counsel, seek the Lord for days and weeks? Abraham left the next morning. 3-day journey with 2 other men to Mount Moriah, which is where the temple sits today. The temple sat, the Temple Mount, which means God is my teacher. Immediately, he left. You have to say, how did he know God? What did he know? He knew God. He knew him by the very Spirit, because there were no testimonies, there was nothing written, there were no stories that he could look at that we look at today. But he was able to see the invisible, which is like the foundation of the house. And then when he gets to the mountain, he makes one of what I think is one of the most amazing verses in all of Scripture. So he's about to go up to where he's going to sacrifice Isaac. And he says to the 2 men that accompanied them on the journey, he says, you wait here. The lad and I will go up and worship. And we will come back to you. How could he say that? Beloved, this is the father of our faith. This is the beginning point of knowing God. To know him as Abraham knew him. Look at the life lesson of the first of the patriarchs. He was able to see the invisible and know God as he was. And this is where we also must start. And if we don't know God like that and only know about him, then we need to pray and ask him to reveal to us this aspect of his nature, El Shaddai, that he revealed to Abraham in the very beginning of his walk with God.